Hello, my name is Mark Sullivan, and on behalf of Science Gallery Detroit, I'd like to welcome you to this conversation with the recipients of our inaugural Rapid Residency program. Before getting into the program, I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors, the Michigan State University Federal Credit Union and Science Sandbox, for their support. Without that support, programs like this couldn't happen. Today's program is being presented in conjunction with Science Gallery Detroit's current exhibition, Future Present, Design in a Time of Urgency. Future Present is on display at 1001 Woodward in downtown Detroit through December 11th. The exhibition explores humanity's nuanced relationship to various forms of design and the impact it has on the future. To learn more about the exhibition and our other exhibition programs, please visit detroit.sciencegallery.com. So to start off, I want to give a bit of a history of our Rapid Residency program. It was actually inspired by the first Rapid Residency program, which took place in our sister site in Dublin. And a few weeks into COVID, they noticed that artists were losing gigs, galleries were closing, exhibitions were shutting their doors, conferences were abandoning plans to take place, papers were not going to be able to be presented, and so forth. And this was creating a lot of stress for artists and researchers and makers and creatives all across the whole spectrum of the arts and sciences. And so they decided to create a program that might allow artists both the opportunity to respond to this peculiar moment brought about by COVID, and also engage their work and their thought in a way that would allow them to respond productively and creatively. So they put out a national call and received a large number of proposals, so many proposals that they actually went to Trinity College and got more funding so that they could produce more proposals. And in Detroit, we heard about this and just thought it was a really good idea because Detroit was facing the same circumstances. COVID was decimating the city, and as you've probably read or may be aware, it had disproportionate effect on people of color across the board and indigenous people. And so we felt particularly strapped by this situation and wanted to do something, but we also wanted it to focus on Detroit. So we decided to make our emphasis Detroit and the creatives in Detroit. And we crafted this Rapid Residency program. And so that's part of the background of why we're doing this. And what we hope to accomplish was not only to get creatives to engage with the situation and find an outlet to respond to their moment, but also to develop ideas and concepts. And for Science Gallery Detroit, this was a new approach because we often work with exhibits and they're often either done or in the process of construction when we start talking to people. So this program, we actually jumped in much earlier. And we wanted to catalyze the development of ideas. And we decided that we were not going to ask people to reach a finished product, and that we really wanted to work with them on formulating an idea or a concept that eventually might become a product or an exhibition or a workshop or whatever. But we weren't going to require that of them. We just wanted to work on the development of the idea. And so that's the route that we took. And so with me today are our 5 recipients. We received an enormous number of applications, and their concepts and ideas were chosen by a panel. And I'll just run through them, although you have a chance to meet them in more detail. But we have Jordyn Davis, Summer Krinsky, Maiingan, iNDiO, Wekwiidong, Cherise Morris, and Amira Hanafi. And so the format we're going to follow is to give each of them some time, perhaps with some interjections from the rest of us, to talk about their work, a little bit about who they are and their background, and the concept and idea that they work with on this residency. And once we've gone through everybody, we'll also take some time afterwards to reflect on the program, what worked, what didn't work, and probably most importantly, where things could go next. So we'll start with a round of introductions, and let's see. I suppose we could use the screen to determine the order, except we'll use the other order. And maybe Summer, you could start, and then we'll go around.
Should I do my whole presentation now, or just introduction of who I am?
You can do your whole, introduce yourself and your whole presentation.
Okay. My name is Summer Krinsky, and I am a musician, creator, recording engineer, composer, etc. And I am thrilled to be a part of this group for Science Gallery Detroit's Rapid Residency program. So basically, the idea that I came up with was inspired by the strange circumstances of the coronavirus that we're all kind of facing. And in the beginning, when things started to get really bad, my personal immediate fear was that we were going to have to go into triage in the hospitals. And that the concept of triage has always been just absolutely terrifying to me. The fact that you have a limited number of resources, and doctors who are, exist to keep people alive. That's what their goal is they have to decide who dies now. And that's just a terrifying concept. And I was watching it happen in Italy, and I was very scared it was going to come to be happening in Detroit, because we had very high rising cases early on. And so for me, the obvious solution was to shut everything down, because you had to slow the spread to combat the possibility of having triage having to happen in the hospitals. But it didn't seem like the national agreement was it didn't seem like nationally everyone was in agreement. And I couldn't understand at first why people weren't as fearful as I was of having to have the hospitals go into triage. And I started to explore this thought more, and kind of why are people not thinking about the limited resources? They're just thinking, oh, if I get sick, I'll be able to go to the hospital and be fine, or be helped at least. And it was in the news that we were running out of ventilators and all of that. But it didn't seem like it was the top concern for those people that didn't want to shut down. It didn't seem like they were thinking about the fact that there was just objectively a limited supply in that moment. So as I thought about it more, I was kind of starting to think that this was, what are the other things in America that kind of relate to this? And I started to think that the national culture kind of has a lot to do with our inability to recognize hospital limited resources as a central issue of why we needed to shut down. So the American culture is based on being able to have continuous growth. So our economic model is based on continuous growth. If you're running a company and they have a profit every month that's the same, that isn't necessarily good. It's only good if their profit is larger every month. And so that idea of limited or unlimited growth in a world of limited resources was the basic inspiration for this project. So the central data point for unlimited growth in limited resources in America as a whole for me is gas. So I wanted to deal with data involving the price of gas because that's been a huge kind of concept that has been argued that it is something we need to be aware of, that it's limited, and then there is the argument that we just find more of it with fracking, even though people don't understand that it's still a limited amount that exists, that the earth reproduces more of at a pace that is much slower than our extraction. So then I was trying to come up with what is the other data point that is something we may have maybe a little more of an understanding. What is the base data point of why we have this system of unlimited growth? And I kind of came to wanting to deal with the data surrounding the price of gold, because gold was the basic, the baseline of how we measured our monetary system at one point. And we then got away from that because gold is not, we stopped using gold as a acceptable currency because it is a limited resource, and thus we can't control the supply. And so it was kind of these three, so the three data points I was really interested in this very it was hospital bed availability, gold, and the price of oil. So I wanted to take these and relate them, even though they seemed very unrelated, and use them to control a sound collage of interviews on how people were dealing with the coronavirus, and how they were emotionally, monetarily, and health-wise being affected.
Fantastic. Yes, I think after we get through the first round here, we can come back to that. To me, that's both one of the most fascinating aspects of your work, and one of the most challenging one is how to go from these systems, concrete social systems, to sound in a way that allows people to use their ears to hear systems interacting, which I think is a fascinating proposition, but we can explore that a little bit in the latter part of the program. Cherise, you want to go next?
Sure. I know someone has to step out a little early. I'm fine to wait if that's better for time.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Maiingan.
Okay. Hello, my name is Maiingan. I go by iNDiO. Real short. Residing in Detroit right now, originally from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in a little town called Baraga. There's a reservation there called the Kuna Bay Indian Community. I'm a member there. That's where I grew up, was born and raised there. This residency, I kind of stumbled across it. I think it was Instagram or something like that. And of course was interested because of the opportunities being limited because of COVID. So I was applying for a lot more than just this one. There was other opportunities too. I was fortunate enough to get picked, and I'm thankful for that. So I'd like to show my appreciation for that. I have a lot of ideas, and I had a lot of things that I was thinking about in my head as far as what to do for the residency. And of course I was getting overwhelmed because I was thinking, oh no, I don't have a tangible thing, to show or present, or, and Mark had mentioned, well, we don't necessarily have to come up with a finished product, so to speak. So that helped kind of ease my mind and allowed me to think more about the idea and not stress about it. So the idea that I had was just providing the opportunity for Detroiters and people who come to this city who might not be from here to just learn more about the indigenous populations that existed before colonization or before Michigan was a state or anything like that. Detroit is rich with indigenous history, and there's been a lot of things that happened here. A lot of land changed hands, or whatever you want to call it, through treaties or wars or force or disease, or just change in general. Culture shock on a different level. I was trying to think of how to formulate it, and the easiest thing I can come up with to combine, the history of, oral teachings in my culture and technology would be to go to these site-specific locations that are historically important for this area and incorporate through VR or, you know, tech, even if it's just a sign that, you know, says this is a historical marker with a QR code that maybe links to videos, or even immersive technology through VR where you can actually stand somewhere and see, you know, like maybe what a village used to look like or what that area looked like before it was colonized. And just to bring awareness to that, because there was, you know, years and years and years of education through the public school system and whatnot, even when I grew up, where there was misinformation and disinformation, where the history wasn't being taught to us completely like it should have been. And I feel like that it makes you feel a little disenfranchised, or it separates you from that connection with the land, which is very important to any culture. You know, their land, their home base, where they're from, is very important, just like your language, your culture and traditions, which are kind of two different things, but they interrelate. I feel like bringing those things back will help mend maybe old wounds or build bridges where there once was before, or maybe they got burned down. I don't know. Just to help open up the eyes of the people that do live here, that, you know, the Native people have always been here and we're still here. You know, even though our numbers are way down for obvious reasons, we're still here and we're still thriving. And I just think that it's an important part of this city. So, you know, there's lots of locations. I'd like to go out and physically document these locations where there was battles, where there was land taken, or where treaties happened, or where important people were killed or died, or whatever, to just bring it more to the forefront, so people, you can't just close a book and just forget about it and put it away in a library somewhere. And, you know, it needs to be spoken about and talked about on a day-to-day basis, because it is part of Detroit and it is part of this area a lot more than we would like to think, you know. So I don't know, without getting too long-winded, that was my basic idea. And moving forward, you know, would be the actual going to the sites, documenting it, getting video footage for VR applications, or simply just producing signs or placards or monuments or whatever, and linking them all together so it can be an overall experience for someone who's like, you know, actually interested in that part of Detroit's history. So I don't know, that's pretty much where I'm at with that right now.
Actually, that part to me is also one of the challenges. When I started trying to think of how to find people who might contribute as mentors, it's not easy to figure out who knows where those sites were. Like,
Yeah.
And, you know, I started looking at historical documents about trappers and, you know, economics documents. And so one thing about your project, which I think is really fascinating overall, but there's also this dimension, like it seems to have lots of layers and could probably take a couple of years, because the VR development and producing is one part, but then this historical research is also really crucial. So it seems to me to be a really rich sort of bunch of connections that you can explore, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you go with that. And I know you have to leave a little bit early, but I'm wondering if you could, so like you mentioned that you envisioned creating VR that would allow somebody to see these things before they were colonized, which obviously is a kind of project of imagination.
Yeah.
But it also seems something that, I mean, VR is perfect for that. There's just no other way to do it. And I guess if you did like, you know, a Hollywood style movie, but that always looks in a way, you know, kind of hokey, too realistic. So I think that the choice of VR would be really fascinating, and I'm hoping that you get the chance to build that out and follow that. Anybody else have any comments related to what he said that you'd like to put in, since he won't be able to stay around for the later period? Not Summer. You look
It's
like
such a fascinating idea. I love it. I would be really excited to see that around. I love the idea in general of, um, using VR as a teaching tool, and then having it be just this thing that's in the open, that people could stumble upon and
Mhm.
learn from. I think it would be really incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, the more I thought about it, and the more I put more thought into it, it started to unravel. And like Mark said, it started to become this big thing, and it was like, whoa, maybe I bit off more than I can chew. But it can be broke down into layers, and and it definitely would take a lot of time. But we got time, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah. Okay.
yeah. So it's a good thing. Thanks for joining us, and just whenever you have to go ahead and jump out.
Yeah, I gotta get back to work here in a little bit. So
Thanks a million. Cherise, you want to jump now?
Yeah. So my name is Cherise. I am a poet, artist, and spiritual worker here in Detroit. And my proposal arose from an ongoing project that I've been working on for the past year and some change called Visions of the Evolution. It's a series of devised ritual performances that utilize various modes of engagement, visual and performative representations, sound, language, of course, as a writer, and also ritual practices that aren't tied to any specific traditions, to work through and open spaces that facilitate examining the connection between our individual healing journeys and our collective reimagining and recreation of the world around us. And when COVID first hit, it struck me as a time where for the first time, I mean, in my life, everyone was kind of mandated to turn inward in this really interesting way. There was an isolation that was lingering. Like I would walk down the streets and it would just be me, and I would just be alone with myself. And there was also a heaviness to it. And as a Black person in the United States, this lingering heaviness was nothing new to me. And then watching the way that things were progressing in Detroit and elsewhere in the United States, thinking about the ways that yet another thing was ravaging the Black community as results of centuries of trauma and oppression, and violence and structural inequalities. So this concept arose to, and since, the project was already thinking about the ways that we can connect, spiritual matter, and use that to shift and transform the physical matter around us. This project started as me wanting to look into developing a soundscape that was based in principles of quantum physics and frequencies, that would accompany forthcoming versions of the projects. But before I could do that, before I could think about like the application, I had to really take a step back and dig into the foundation and the ideological and theoretical concepts of quantum physics that were connected to spiritual healing. And so, that brought me to a lot of really interesting things. As someone who studied language, I look a lot into the origin of language, and I think about language as a way that describes identity. And so I've looked a lot into language and notions of Blackness. The concepts that linguistically, Blackness as a term is confined. It's something to be afraid of. It's something that is out there. And the more that I dug into quantum physics, I kept returning to these concepts of Blackness in the universe around us. the Black body as something that absorbs radiation, the concept of black holes, and thinking about how in the realm of physics, those concepts of Blackness were something that was idealized. It was something that was expansive and infinite in this way, which really struck me. And so over the course of doing this research, I was really connecting the principles of like physical matter with this energetic operating force, and thinking about the ways that, you know, quantum theory can be a metaphor for humanism and the human experience, particularly in the context of Black folks in the United States. And I landed on this really beautiful sentiment, working from, you know, Mayer's first law of thermodynamics, which is something I remember from high school. And I always carried that with me, the concept that energy is changed and it's transformed, but it's neither created nor destroyed. I started thinking about trauma, racialized trauma, as a form of quanta, as units of energy, and then coming to you know, in the same way that energy, in that theory, was neither created nor destroyed, thinking about, you know, Black identity as being neither created nor destroyed by white supremacy, right? So as human beings, we all contain pieces of stars in the elements in our bodies. And once we recognize that, we can recognize that so much of us, while it might be shaped and informed by the world around us and trauma and violences that occur, we are not created by those things, and we are not destroyed by those things. So I thought that was a really beautiful sentiment to end on.
Yeah. I also think it's really fascinating that in quantum physics and in some of the spiritual concepts that you've alluded to, and in sound and music, there's this interrelationship between matter and vibration, to the point that, you know, at some level in quantum physics, matter turns into vibrations and has this uncanny connection to vibrations in music and sound. And so I know that, you know, the exploration with the sound collage is ongoing, but I'm really fascinated about where that could lead. And like, it's a really unusual. When I first read your proposal, I thought, wow, these things, how is she going to connect those? They're so far apart. But then hearing you talk about them and thinking about it, I realized like they're super interconnected, you know, and the connections are really not just theoretical, but they're almost visceral. So I'm really looking forward to you can, you know, working this out and making all those connections. Jordyn, you want to go next?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Jordyn Davis. I am a bassist, composer, singer-songwriter from the Metro Detroit area. Currently finishing up my master's in jazz studies at Michigan State, and came across the rapid residency. I think probably Mark sent me an email about it. And initially I was considering not applying, just because COVID was such a crazy time. And I mean, we're still in COVID. The pandemic is not over, if you guys didn't know. But we're still in COVID and stuff is still really messed up. But during this early summertime, when this application opened up, at the beginning of the year, I started working on a commission for a piece of music involving tuba. Hello, this is my cat. She's.
Let's go. We got cats and dogs. My cat's laying down on top of it.
She likes to be the center of attention, so sorry about that. But so yeah, I started the year off working on this project, involving the tuba and writing music for the tuba to celebrate Black people and Black music. And around May, June, when news started to break about Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, I was really devastated by that and was completely incapable of doing very much for the remainder of that time, for the month of June. And also during this time, I was supposed to be finding ways to premiere this work of music, trying to get performances, trying to get recordings of this piece of music. But the collaboration, the initial collaboration kind of fell apart as a result of COVID and as a result of many implications in the circumstances. And so I found myself with this concept and this idea that I had been working on that I didn't really feel like it represented my voice and it represented what I was trying to say. And so essentially I applied to kind of revitalize this work and have it be something that addressed, my immediate concerns and my immediate feelings about, being a Black person in America, dealing with COVID, being an artist, being a Black artist, and also the upcoming election. So my project is essentially the commission of a work for tuba, electric bass drum set, and string quartet entitled Stand Up. And it is a piece that I wrote for Breonna Taylor. And it is the intent and the message in the music is that, we have to, as Black people and as our allies, have to stand up for the things that we believe in. We have to use our voices. We have to get active, and we have to get moving. We have things that need to get done, and things are really terrible right now. But we have the individual capacity to activate ourselves and activate each other to make things happen and to create better changes in our communities. And so, during this time, I was also feeling very debilitated by fear and debilitated by the fact that, we're confined to the indoors and there's so many things going on in the world. How am I going to get out into the world and how am I going to contribute to what's going on? I didn't feel safe going to protests. I didn't feel safe going to the grocery store, let alone. So what ways was I able to use my skills and my creativity and my voice to contribute to this change and to take action. And the best way that came to me was to write a piece and to say something and to hopefully inspire and activate other people to get out and vote and to also be active in their communities and engaging with each other and just doing stuff, getting people motivated and getting people out into the world. And so also kind of just going back to something that Cherise mentioned, having to look inward, during this time and being alone. I mentioned at the beginning, I play jazz bass, I'm a composer, I'm a singer-songwriter. And those are things that have just recently come into fruition in my identity, within the last 6 or 7 years of my life. And those three worlds, those three parts of my identity have been very separated and have also been inherently just from the Western canon, Western classical music and Western pop music and that sort of thing. And I have really been trying to find a way to create in a way that embraces and utilizes all of my musical perspectives and my experience in different musical areas, but also most importantly, making music for myself and for Black people. That's something that, as a result of this time, I was like, okay, well, if I have the ability and the capacity to create in all of these different mediums, right now, I think it is in my best interest to create music for the people who need it the most. And in my opinion, that's Black people. And whether that is healing music or music to activate us, to get us to do things, or music to have and help us grieve, whatever it is, that's what I kind of feel like my purpose is right now. And that's what I'm doing with this project. And so, as it's kind of been mentioned that we didn't have to create a final product for this, but I I have a final product, and it's going to be premiering the day before the election. So November 2nd will be the premiere of that piece virtually. We'll have some, mostly all the musicians are from Detroit. The Sister Strings the Sister Strings project based in Detroit is a string quartet, and myself and Todd Watts will be on drums, and Anthony Walker is playing tuba. And we also have a spoken word artist that is going to be performing and offering some words as a part of the work itself. So that's my project. But I also just wanted to say, just a comment from Cherise's project. I really loved just hearing about that. And something that I wrote down that you said is that, Blackness is infinite. And, that was something that I kind of struggled with even in my project, is because I was writing music, and I am writing music for Black people and inspired by the music also written by Black people. So the style of the piece is also inspired by Black music and hip hop from Detroit. And so exploring this idea that Blackness is infinite, I coming from the background that I have, like hip hop is not, hip hop and R&B is like not my specialty. Like I study jazz, I study classical music, popular music, and that sort of thing. So I felt, if I'm going to be completely transparent, I felt pretty insecure, deciding to all of a sudden write music for Black people, because I've never been allowed to do that, or I've never been probed to do that. And so I was like, I don't think my music is going to be Black enough. Or whatever. What does that even mean? Why did I even have that thought? Like, why did I think that my music wasn't going to be Black enough? And you saying that Blackness is infinite, and there's no, it's not created and destroyed. It's like that really reassured my point of view and my perspective in the piece. So thank you for saying that, and thank you for offering that. And I really admired hearing about everybody's project so far, but that specifically, I wrote that down, and that stuck with me and resonated with my project.
I think it's also really fascinating that, in a way, this whole project grew out of a collapsed project. And so sometimes I think we think that failure is the end, but one thing that I thought about hearing you talk was, actually in your case, failure was the beginning. This thing collapsed, it fell apart, but that was the moment that made it possible for you to reconceive this whole incredible project. So I think that's a really important lesson for all of us to bear in mind, like especially when we're in those moments where things seem to be crashing all around us, or we're stuck, or we can't break through to what we're trying to break through. That might be just the signs of the beginning of something really phenomenal. So, Amira,
Hi, here I am. Yeah, first I wanted to say that I feel really privileged to be in this space with like listening to such like incredible ideas, like really great stuff. And I hope that I can talk about something that like lives up to everybody who talked before me. So when I wrote the proposal for this residency, I think I just arrived in Hamtramck after taking this really like what I think is kind of a wild decision, motivated by a number of different factors, to move from Egypt, where I'd been living for 10 years, in the middle of a pandemic, to a place that I have no community in this place, except for the couple of friends that I came to work with, who are starting up a nonprofit called City of Asylum Detroit. And that the aim of that organization is to give asylum residencies to artists who are threatened in their home countries. So it would be international artists and those people who might be threatened by the state, like they might have been imprisoned, or who are threatened because of perhaps like their identity, and like their society around them might be threatening to them. So we would be giving like long-term residencies to those people in Detroit, and especially specifically in Hamtramck. So I was trying to, and I'm working with them like I work as both an artist, but also in like cultural management or, the sort of the other side, project management, my work for pay most of the time. I was trying to think of ways in like which I could like bring those things together a little bit, like Jordyn was talking about, like how to like stop being like these are discrete different jobs that I do, and how to bring the sort of like work that I've done in the past, which is often about polyvocality, or like uses polyvocality. What I mean by that is like bringing different voices into the same space, and using them to describe, say, the same thing. I'm interested in like in difference in general, let's say. And so my initial idea was that I was going to ask migrant residents of Hamtramck to help me to write a manual for how to make a home. And I was going to write like a polyvocal manual for how to make a home. But once I got here and I started, first I have to like design a strategy of like, how am I going to reach people or meet people during a pandemic? That was a little bit difficult, I would say. And then I started on the project, and one of the things I did was go for a walk with a person who grew up in Hamtramck and who had come here. Her parents had brought her here from another country, and she was undocumented, and it made me realize a lot from my previous work as well, like how people have responded to things, that I want to stop asking people to tell me their stories or document people's stories and like make them something to look at, and because even though I try to like mix all those stories together and try to make these documents that are very confusing, and that they also, like, to me, I'm trying to work with like these ideas of collectivity and how it's hard, how there are challenges in collectivity. There are also rewards for like accommodating difference, or even that just sounds very, very like not big enough. I want to love difference, not accommodate it. But in any case, I want to stop doing that, asking people to tell their stories. And when I'm thinking about like these target audiences or whatever group maybe that I want to reach or work with, and these are groups that I'm not like, they're like outside of myself. They're always somebody that like I'm a part of in some way. That I want those to, rather than ask people to tell their stories or like put themselves on display, which I think for people of color is something that like, we are asked to do a lot. We're asked to give testimony. Rather than doing that, I want to actually make space for like states of being, for being rather than for telling. I've been trying to do that more, and then it's just like, it's somehow, like in my practice, it's like I learn something and then I make something, maybe the same mistake again, or like, but better, and like, so keep trying to be better and better. So I started thinking about, especially from that one walk that I went on with somebody in Hamtramck, she asked me, we were talking about like our parents' migration stories. And she asked me something about like whether my father spoke English well, because she seemed to have like, and I think it was she just decided thought that was a marker of like the possibility for like success, as an immigrant. Even though the answer was no, he did not speak English well. But in any case, I started thinking about like rather than asking people to tell stories, I started thinking about language as a home. I started thinking about the ways in which language played out in my home when I was growing up, and how I've become even more of a bilingual person, or maybe I became like living in Egypt and speaking a lot of the time in another language. I also, Hamtramck is like this crazy amount of language in this tiny little 2-mile square place. Anyway, I feel like maybe I'm being a bit long-winded. So I've shifted everything into how can I like make a space for people who speak no more than one language to gather together, and this is all very experimental and I don't know how it's going to work out exactly, but like how can I make a space where you can actually speak your language. And when I say your language, I mean like whatever combination of languages or named languages that you speak, like your specific unique language, and forget about like code switching and all that, but like how can you actually bring your full self into a space? That's like the long-term ideal. Like how could I build a place where like lots of people could be speaking their own languages and then no one would be bothered, be like, oh, I don't understand, you know? I'm actually, there is like a concrete thing going to happen in the next couple of weeks leading up to an event for this particular project. But this is something that I think like there's going to be lots of activity that happens over time. I'm not thinking about this as like as a project that's a discrete thing, but I do have like a discrete activity that's going to happen that's being supported by the Gray Center at the University of Chicago. What I'm going to be doing is there's an act, a bill that's like there's a very, very Republican representative in Congress from Iowa who has repeatedly put this bill in Congress it's called the English Language Unity Act. It tries to declare an official language for the United States, which we do not have. And it tries to declare the English as that official language, and to stipulate that during a naturalization process, you would have to go like prove your English language ability. It basically says like, it's like a US citizen's responsibility to like speak English, I guess, read it, write it, I don't know. It doesn't actually pass through Congress, but it's a concerted effort. It was reintroduced like in this past session of the Congress last year. So I'm going to ask people, and this is like an open invitation to translate, to do a crowd translation of that act into many languages, and then hold a workshop in which we're going to like finalize that, which is basically, the idea is to get people to talk about how we can like accommodate difference, and also like what should we do with that act, right? If it was like we translated it, are we creatively translating it? Are we like literally translating it? Anyway, that's where I'm at. I hope that was clear. I feel like I like went a little bit all over the place. That's how my mind works.
I think in one of our earlier discussions, you used a term that stuck with me and that I'm still sort of thinking a lot about, which was language justice. And I don't think I'd ever heard that before. And so it's still resonating with me. And like now hearing you talk about all these things, I think I'm getting an even better idea of where all that could lead. And again, as with almost each project, it seems like there are implications that could go a long way for a long time. And one of the things to me, and I wish Maiingan was still here, but like hearing you all talk is just incredible. And hearing you talk about your projects, I know several of you have said this too, but I also get that from hearing you talk. And so one thing I thought about this residency program in the future, I wondered, maybe we should bring you all together, or bring the recipients together sooner. And then I thought, well, but it took a while for the ideas to come out, so maybe it should be like halfway or something. But I think hearing you all talk is really exciting, and I think it probably is inspiring too for the other recipients. So maybe finding some way to create more opportunities for the recipients to have a dialogue with each other might be worth figuring out. I don't know what you think.
I would be down.
Would it have been too soon before now? I mean, we only have a few weeks, so logistically it could be, it takes people a while to get up. And I know, also the whole mentoring thing, is we're trying to work out a way to make that smoother, but it's kind of labor intensive to build those relationships, and like finding a mentor, getting an opportunity to talk to them, setting it up and so forth also takes a little bit of time. So I guess I'm torn between wanting to have this discussion take place sooner, but also allow time for things to happen that would make it possible. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not.
Yeah, I think that that it would be nice to be connected, but I also understand like what you're saying on the other side. I think that maybe it's just the originally it was like a month-long program. That was what it was meant to do. I think that a month is quite a quick amount of time to try to put all of that into at once. So maybe it's, I mean, I don't know if you're planning another round of this like in a pandemic time. Maybe that stretching the time out a little bit longer, because what is time? Time is very weird now. So I feel like if somebody's like, I'll give you this, this grant for 3 months, I don't like, what difference really would it make? I don't think it would make a lot of difference, to me. Like, what period of time you declared that was going to take place over.
Yeah, and I think that's a great suggestion. And, we wanted it to be quick enough that it wouldn't become cumbersome and, tie up people for really long periods of time. We want it to be nimble, but we don't want to be superficial or rush people. And we want something to actually be able to take place. So I think tweaking it a little bit without turning it into a 6-month thing or something, longer, probably is a good thing to think about. But so I'm curious if you have any final thoughts or things you want to pitch in. Some people were early on in the process, so now that you've heard other people, Summer, I'm curious if you have some reflection on what you heard, or Cherise. And just in general, it's like this is the first time each of you has had the chance to hear the other projects and also to hear people's reaction to your projects. And I personally think each and every one of them has an incredible potential. And I know I said this beforehand, but I'm really eager to see how they evolve and where they go. And even though this program doesn't provide any, sort of ramp into the next project or so forth, there's a lot of connections I could see making between the projects we're working on, things that are going on around Detroit and different cultural institutions, including Science Gallery, which, our next exhibition is going to be about surveillance. And both, the big bugaboo dystopian one, and even, things like citizens paying attention to the environment, sort of surveilling the environment, or microbiological forms of surveillance, or even things like Fitbit and parents putting, ring cameras in their kids' room and so forth. So there might even be some connections between things like that and some of the projects. And food security is coming up, and then music is a few coming down the pipe too. So I'm hoping that there'll be opportunities for you to re-engage with different Science Gallery projects. But maybe just, we still have a few minutes, and if there's something, reflection or a thought or question you'd like to throw out there, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly, like, to go back to your kind of last statement about, do you think this conversation should have happened sooner? I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I needed to make it through the month of September, and also like transition out of this. I mean, like I'm in school, so it's like a little bit different, but like the month of September was hellacious, and I don't like if none of you are in school, like I'm so thankful that you are not in school, and I don't wish that upon you at all. So like for me, like having the conversation now is like perfect because I feel like I've processed so much, especially around this project and around this work, because initially I wasn't even going to, I wanted to premiere it, but I didn't know when I wanted to premiere it. I didn't want to rush it, but like, what was the reason that I was doing all of this? And it's to activate people and to get people to go out and vote. So, now like having this conversation, I think it's kind of like perfect timing because, I'm still wrapping it up, and I heard some things from a couple of you who I definitely will engage with after this conversation to help me wrap up my project because, I'm a creator of music and words are not my forte on purpose. Like I became a composer so that I didn't have to do that much talking, even though I find myself doing a lot of talking as a composer. But just know that, all of you have really helped me in this conversation today. And you will probably hear from me either today or tomorrow because I do need some help. So thank you.
Summer, you look like you were getting ready to say something.
Oh, I mean, it was definitely very inspiring hearing everyone's projects. It also definitely is a unified thing that I think everyone's grew over time from the initial idea. And I know that I've been working a lot on the data scraping part this week of mine, and based on the data I'm getting, it's really been like the speed of the changes has been changing how I think I'm going to approach the sound part of it. So I think, and everyone has talked about having a similar just things in their life happening or actually carrying out the ideas that has made changes happen. So in that way, I think it's great to have the conversation now. In another way, you could have multiple conversations where you hear the starting idea and then watch it grow into an idea.
It's a great suggestion too. Cherise?
Yeah, I'm just leaving this conversation feeling really inspired as well by everyone's projects. It was really interesting to see, even though they're all very different from the outside, once people started getting into talking about them, it was really interesting to hear like the small and subtle connections between everyone's work, particularly like the role of sound. And people like the role that played in a lot of the projects was really striking to me. So yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. Thank you all.
So yeah, I'll just echo that. And, I have been inspired out of my wits. Even in the first discussions, I came away from that with so many ideas, and this has just intensified it all over again. So thank you so much for participating and for your contributions. And I really am intensely interested in seeing what evolves out of this. So I plan to keep tabs on your work and hope you come back and participate in Science Gallery in any way that makes sense. And just to conclude, also would invite you all down to 1001 Woodward to check out the Future Present Design in a Time of Urgency exhibition. I think that you'll find some kindred spirits there too, and a lot of resonance between many of the exhibitions there and the work that you've already done or are embarking on. And basically all you have to do is get an advance ticket. Because of COVID, we have to do reservation system and limited occupancy, but Wednesday through Sunday, there should be lots of time. So you'd be more than welcome, and I'd be very curious to see and hear what you think about that.